Welcome to Cyber Synapse. This week I'm joined by Perry Carpenter, who I am absolutely stoked to be talking to in terms of, I'm going to start at the beginning, Perry, in terms of I think you named yourself a Chief Evangelist and Strategy Officer for
Yeah.
KnowBe4. But I was introduced to you by one of my colleagues, and one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you today is, number one, because you've done a book, which is, as I said earlier, absolutely wonderful in terms of the academic stuff that you've brought to it. So the book is called, let me take my glasses off, I don't even need them, Transformational Security Awareness. And it's a collection of theories about human behaviour. Neuroscience, marketeering. You've also got some cognitive stuff in there, some behavioural stuff in there. It's a fantastic resource. And of course, you work for a company called KnowBe4. I don't know if anybody in this country outside of cybersecurity has any idea on who you are. So to begin with, would you like to introduce yourself as to where the chief evangelist came from?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's got a long backstory. So if you're familiar with the term evangelist in general, an evangelist is somebody that goes out and tells, the good news about whatever. It's normally combined with more of a religious context, but in the tech industry, especially here in the U.S., you hear that term quite a bit. Apple is the one that started that, and they had really famous evangelism program of getting their dev people involved in writing code for Apple, and Guy Kawasaki kind of was the first technical evangelist out there. And that's been adopted by people for the past couple decades of saying, I'm an evangelist for this and for that. And for companies, it's getting to be pretty popular. So I use that mostly because I work a lot with the analyst community as well. And I came out of that. I was an analyst at Gartner Research for quite a while, covering the industry that I'm in right now. And as somebody who's working with that industry, as somebody who was answering a lot of the public relations questions and the media questions, it made sense to adopt that title. And then the strategy piece came because I have a really multifaceted role at KnowBe4 of working with marketing, working with product development, working with mergers and acquisitions, and all of the other things that come along with those things. So it's really more than just communications. It is a lot of that hands-on, and I poke my fingers in as many areas as I can within the company until people get annoyed at me, and then I walk away and give them a couple months break, and then I come back.
And ask the questions, actually, that I would suspect lead to the outpouring of knowledge that you've got into that book. So one of the things that I would say about the book is given that there is, I mean, for anybody who hasn't read it, it is an absolute must in terms of understanding what security means in a world of technology. Yeah. So I'm not going to talk
Mm.
cybersecurity because it's like the words GDPR. It tends to make people's eyes close and they
Oh
stop.
yeah, it's an overused term that doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything to a
Yeah.
lot of people.
So in terms of, I mean, the book, as I was just saying, there's so much knowledge that you put into the book, and for me, there's something about decades and decades of knowledge and experience in something that isn't going to take people an entire year to read. I don't know. I mean, here's one of the things, Perry. How do we get people to become aware of the book so that they can care enough to read it in the first place? Which is one of your
Yeah.
slogans.
Well, I mean, that's a great question, and I did, especially within the first 6 months of releasing it, I put out a lot of intentionality and making people aware. I've kind of let off the accelerator a little bit since then, but one of the reasons that I saw people try and fail to produce books like the one that I did. So there's other good security awareness books out there. Don't get me wrong. I didn't invent anything that other people haven't thought of or put in print before. The thing that I did when I released it, and the reason that this book has been way more successful than any other security awareness book, is because I practiced in the release of it the things that I evangelized within the pages of it. I engaged the community. I got lots of mental buy-in beforehand. I got lots of social proof along with it. And then I kind of built a marketing campaign that I ran just through social media as we released it. And if you know anything about tech books, when you release a tech book, there is no marketing campaign that the publisher puts behind that. It
Uh-huh.
is all the author. And I think if there's any mistake that other authors that have covered this topic have made, is that they haven't practiced what they preached when they released the book. Is they did the cardinal sin that we all accuse security awareness leaders of just assuming that people will come to the information. And we
Mhm.
know that that doesn't work. You have to continue to put that in the minds of the people that are out there, find new ways, new channels to get that out. And I was very aggressive about that within the first several months of the release.
Yeah. Yes, I'm just learning about this marketeering, and I can't say it's my favorite thing to do at all. It's the idea of
No, you feel a little bit like a jerk every now and then because you're pointing at yourself, and which is why I took my foot off the accelerator. I felt like I had enough momentum
yeah.
after that that other people were saying good things about it, and at that point, it's like, all right, I don't have to be my own. I don't have to toot my own horn as much. I can just kind of rely on some of the reviews and some of the word of mouth, and it's getting out there around the world, which is a good
Mm.
thing to see as well.
I think also, I mean, for me, I noticed that actually you'd interviewed quite a number of people in the book
Yeah,
as well. It isn't, Perry Carpenter sitting aloft his, pedestal saying, "Look at me," in a narcissistic tone of
right.
voice. It's actually lots of people giving their approach to why security is so important, why people should care, and I am going to do that air quote thing around the word
It
"should."
should. Yeah.
Um, but there's this idea of why do we need to care? Why do we need to be aware? This is where I'm kind of going to go with you today, which
Sure.
something that I prompted before. So why do people even need to know about this stuff?
It depends on what you mean by stuff. So
Uh,
if you're, well, yeah, it could
all of
be any
it.
stuff, right? But the thing, I think when it comes down to the stuff, it's the thing that we believe is going to be best for somebody, the thing that is going to reduce risk or increase that person's safety, security, and um, uh, all of the things that come with that. And the reason that they should care is because of those things that I just articulated. It is better for them. It is better for the organization that they work for. It's better for society. It's better for their clients, and so on. The thing that we have to do, though, is actually make that ramification, the why you should care, be the thing that gets embedded within their mind rather than the you should just do this thing or do not do these other things, because that's what people aren't going to care about, because you're asking them to change their normal mode of behavior, and people don't like that.
Hmm. Which that actually brings me to, and she says, scanning her mind as she's like, the example you gave, which I thought was really, really clever actually, was the pen rolling off the desk.
Yeah.
That it becomes such an automatic behavior. And I find that it just so happens that my background is around, a bit of IT and cybersecurity. Not that I ever did the cybersecurity training or anything, but having been around high level corporate companies and, casinos, gas stations, as you call them, petrol stations over here, that I was really kind of introduced to this area of you really do need to take care of everything that you're doing every step of the way, almost being frisked down to go into a
Right.
casino. um, and coming from the armed forces, we had something that was and it was literally shoved down our throats. So it wasn't a here's an awareness campaign, it was a you will learn this, something called personal security, so persec,
Mm.
as we were calling it then, and it still is called today, is something that became a natural way of being. To the point, Perry, that I would even say to my kids, be aware of your surroundings when they were
Right.
little. And it was that ingrained that actually I could have created paranoia in my children, hypervigilance. I could have created this really fearful world, but actually it was because that's how I took the world to be as it was. So that where I'm meandering towards at the minute with this little ditty is how do we make some of these behaviors automatic? So I'm thinking that you can kind of talk about some of the things that you've written about in the book.
Sure.
but also it's how do we even get this into the narrative so that people will want to make it an automatic behavior?
Yeah, I mean, that's a a multifaceted question, right?
Hmm.
Because some of the how do you make something automatic within a behavior um, is an interesting question, because sometimes you can design for that to where you push people into that behavior naturally, but that takes a lot of intentionality.
Yes.
Sometimes you're trying to change thoughts and behaviors in a generational way. I mean, one of the other examples that I give is use of seatbelts. um,
Yeah.
when I was growing up, and probably when you were growing up as well, they weren't mandatory, and people could decide when and where to wear the seatbelts and all of that. Now it has become a legal requirement, and it gets taught at the very youngest age of you have to put your seatbelt on, you have to put your seatbelt on, to the point that if you put your car in gear and you have your kids in the back seat and you start to back out of your driveway, your kids start yelling at you because they don't feel safe for you.
Hmm.
And you can also get that to where you're so used to the feeling of the seatbelt being on that if it's not on when you start driving, you naturally feel unsafe. Nothing's changed about your condition from before they were legal to after they were legal, but you've built that within your consciousness and within the consciousness of the emerging generation that it is you are not safe if this is not in place. So that
Yeah.
takes an intentional behavior based thoughts and minds type of campaign that is multi-generational to change that behavior. And we see that same type of campaign happening with things like smoking awareness and
Mhm.
other public health things, like maybe even things like recycling and so on. The things that I would not have thought to separate in my trash. People in the younger generation, if they see you throw mixed trash away, they'll naturally say, you shouldn't do that. That should go over here in the recycling bin. And so you can tackle that at um, in a generational way and come away way better than we have been before. But if you're trying to do the smaller version of that, then there's, I think, two ways that you do it. One, well, and if we go hearts and minds, that's probably the way that I would break it up.
Mhm.
Um, One is if I can encode something within the way that somebody naturally feels about a behavior, then that's right. Then I'll do that. So that gets into some of the behavior design, behavioral economics pieces that I know we can go
Yeah.
in different directions on. But if I can use some nudges to push people in the right direction to where they don't even realize that they're making a decision, but I'm weighting the preference in the direction that I want somebody to go. So I'm adding friction to the thing that I don't want them to do, and I'm reducing friction in the thing that I do want them to do. So
Mhm.
it's just easier for them to make the secure decision or the right decision. And then the other thing is if I can start to tell stories that matter and infuse those stories with the right amount of emotion and the right amount of character, to where I'm not just spinning out facts and figures and logic and policy, but I'm telling the story of um, somebody that they really care about, whether that's them, their kids, their organization, their country, or so on, and really infusing all of the things that we know about storytelling, production, marketing, and everything else within that, so that they naturally make associations with the positive or negative feelings that we're hoping that they'll have associated with it. Then you're more likely to drive them um, to at least care more about it. But I also talk about a gap between even caring about something and accomplishing that thing. So
Yeah.
so I can know something and not care about something. I can also care about something deeply and still not do the thing, because it's sometimes easier based on my own habit or my own context to not do the thing.
Well, I'm just thinking with your example of the seatbelts there. So I don't know if you were subjected to the clunk click every trip campaign that happened. That's what we had in the UK.
Yeah, we had similar campaigns here in the
Yeah.
U.S.
But with I mean, the campaigns themselves have gone from, showing crash test dummies being thrown around cars. I'm thinking of as you were talking, I was like, yes, and there was the broken eggs for the people who cycle on their bikes and don't wear helmets.
Right.
That quite often there has to be this level of needing to care, but also I'm just thinking about the seatbelts. I've seen so many people that will put a seatbelt on to avoid a fine rather than doing it for the safety.
Mhm.
So that we've got lots of different ways of.
Yeah, different levers
Mhm.
there. There's another interesting campaign because it's really hard in public health to get people to make healthy decisions for themselves.
Well,
And
aren't we in a time that exacerbates that
yeah, well,
completely?
and we've seen that. We've definitely seen that because everybody believes that they're going to be the exception to the rule.
Uh-huh.
Or that I mean, we could get into people, not believing the science or not believing the other things, but
Yeah.
let's say they fully believe the Surgeon General warning on the pack of cigarettes, or they fully believe what the national scientists are saying about the threat. They still believe they're going to be the exception a lot of times. And what we've seen with some of the more effective health awareness campaigns with like smoking is that people will not choose, or people won't choose to stop smoking for their own health generally. What they will choose to stop smoking for is the health of their family sometimes.
Yeah.
But even more effective than that has been a campaign that shows what secondhand smoke does to the lungs of their pets. It's real.
You've got to find the pain point.
Yeah, you have to find the point that they really care about. And I think even maybe the reason that hit home so much more is because as people get older, sometimes they're widowed or they're widowers, and the only companion they have is their pet, and they see that pet is, a very defenseless innocent. And if my actions are harming this defenseless innocent, then it naturally brings that home. And these people, especially as they're up in years, have experienced multiple levels of loss. And they don't want to contribute to that one more level of loss that they then feel responsible for, and they have a whole, another gap that they have to fill somehow.
Well, I'm thinking there that's leaning towards, and I know I can talk to you a little bit about theories and so on. That's leaning towards kind of the locus of control. That there's something about my behaviour externalizes onto something else. I'll
Right.
take responsibility for it. And I'm thinking here of reading Alan Carr's book on stopping smoking, and he gave an example of I think it was a war veteran who was in hospital who was smoking, nearly 100 fags a day.
Wow.
And what was happening at the end of it is he was getting, his septicemia was moving around his body, and it meant that bits and pieces were being kind of chopped off at a rate where it would be the toes, the foot, and it still didn't stop him smoking. And of course, I work a lot with people in therapy, so I see addictions of all sorts. And yeah, those narratives are really, really common. And it's really interesting how people very rarely look at themselves as that conduit in which to do and make the changes. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking about really this idea of, and I will when we get onto prompts in terms of helping people change their behaviour, I'll come back to the seatbelt analogy because I had one there when you were talking about that. How do we actually create a campaign without terrifying people? So one of the things I often see in the cybersecurity industry, and have been guilty of myself in terms of educating around cyber trauma, because that's the thing that I deal with. How do we create a story that's about technology that doesn't come from, let me say, the maybe the Mary Aitkins perspective of CSI cyber, that
Right.
that basically says, whatever it is you need to do in terms of scaring people. But how do we get the message about what can go wrong?
Yeah.
What pain point are we looking at, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to try to solve for, right? Because we know that emotion has to be a component of this. People, if people just see the information, they're not going to care naturally. They have to have that land home in some way.
Yeah.
As we were talking about seatbelts and public health and everything else, I'm reminded of the fact that most people don't buy alarms for their house until they've been broken into them. Their own home has been broken into,
Yeah.
or a neighbor has been broken into, or a family member has been broken into. So
Hmm.
at some point it has to land and feel real. Now, the good thing about storytelling is that storytelling, when you tell a good story, it lights up regions of the brain, um, as if you are actually experiencing that thing itself. So
Hmm.
you don't have to say and point your finger and wag your finger in somebody's face and saying, you are going to have a really bad time if you do this or don't do this. What you can do is you can deflect that and tell stories, in through your marketing campaigns, through materials that you deliver, or just through simple presentations, and talk about the positive and negative effects of different things that people have done.
Hmm.
And once you invoke storytelling, then people's minds will naturally put themselves in that place.
Yeah.
But you're not doing it in such a pejorative way that people feel like you're assaulting them with fear, uncertainty, and doubt, especially if you employ really good story techniques like tension and release. So you give people the natural, you've got your curve that you're following of emotional response, and you dip into this negative area where people feel loss, or they feel fear, or they feel pain. But then you release that with a laugh, or some lighthearted thing, or bring it back to stasis so that people aren't left in that dark place. And I think that's the thing that we tend to do, is we tend to say, all of this terrible stuff is going to happen. And yeah, go deal with that.
Yes. Now, the reason I'm going along with this, because I'm empathizing in exactly what you're saying here. So in terms of when I deliver my cyber trauma training, I'm not talking about anything that really has a positive outcome. So
Mhm.
I have to be very careful when I'm talking to my, let's call them an audience, that what I'm doing is physiologically exactly what you're talking about there is yes, I use a lot of humor. There are little anecdotes in there, basically to bring people back into their homeostatic balance. And I always advise, not that it's a great piece of advice considering I'm a functional health practitioner, I tell them to get a little bag of Haribo. And I say, make sure you've got some sugar in you, because actually, as your energy levels dip, you're going to need a little bit of a spike. Um,
Right.
Not the best healthy advice out there, but at the same time, I know that when I deliver that particular topic, it's a difficult topic at the best of times.
Yeah, some
So,
topics just by their own nature are triggering, and
yes, yeah.
that's the thing we have to be aware of when we deliver any kind of training. If we
Mm,
talk about, um, virtually anything, there can be a trigger for somebody based on either the topic that we're talking about or the way that we present it. And
yeah.
so we have to give people, in every context that we can, some emotional, release, where we recognize the fact that we can be, taking somebody into a dark place or an uncomfortable place. We have to somehow give them an escape hatch to that.
Yeah. So
Easier said than done, right?
yes, and I'm thinking actually this is what I noticed in terms of the message that certainly was being driven in your book is, educate your. So I know that the book's been written more, and it seems to fit more with businesses rather than the singular practitioner. And I will ask you about
Right.
it in just a moment. But there is this idea of educate your staff, create a space where you're not shaming them. So one of the
Right.
techniques that I know many cybersecurity professionals use is simulated phishing. And then what actually happens at the end of it is, then you give the message about this could have been, rather than, oh my God, I can't believe you pressed on the button and, I
Right.
don't know,
Exactly.
sacked away all of the business's finances and, exposed everybody's data. So my question would be, how do we, or how do you, in terms of thinking here, see getting the message out to the singular practitioners? So right now, because of lockdown, especially in the United Kingdom, lots of people are still working from home, where I don't necessarily believe, and I know so, that people are in that space where they're taking the same kind of precautions,
Hmm.
or they're considering the internet um, in a way that they feel safe in their own homes, and therefore forget to do some of those protocols. And how do we get people to think about security when they're on their own or as singular practitioners?
Yeah. So the only way that I think you can do that effectively is through some type of community aspect. So if people are not getting direction from above in some way that
Hmm.
they're listening to, then the only way that you can do it from is from underneath, which would be their clientele asking for it, and they're probably not thinking of that in that perspective, or raising awareness through the community. You have to create a community norm. So you're always thinking about what are the levers or social pressures that I can put into play in some way.
Yeah.
And so at that point, it is, how do you establish the cultural norm that you're going for at a community level? And the way that I think about that, way easier said than done. Really, it's something really accomplishable within an organization, within a company. A
Mm.
little bit harder for floating therapists that are all independent contractors, essentially. But when you think about society in general, the reason that we have societies or cultures that flock together in this tribal type of way is that there is an established social norm that's called acceptable. Actually, whenever we have somebody that deviates from that, we call them antisocial.
Yeah.
And so what you have to start to do is you have to build enough social pressures so that the acceptable form of behavior is to do the right thing rather than the wrong thing. And we have actually two names for people that that are outside of the social norm. We have people that we idolize because they're doing things that are good or better, or
Mm.
society believes that they should incorporate in some way, or we have people that we demonize or ostracize that are on the other side of that. And
Yeah.
what we have to get is that you find ways to take the people that should be the shining example and start to build the cultural norm around that. And then people that are naturally not doing the thing that they should do, the thing that will ultimately be the best for the society, those start to be pushed into that more demonized or ostracized type of camp.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, those are again. It brings me back to that word evangelist. That's that, because they're on the pushing the narrative, and the people who are often revered in terms of,
Right.
or maybe not.
Yeah, yeah. It's
I
how do
see.
you push the narrative? Because society and culture, the reason pockets of culture exist is for mutual protection and long-term sustainability.
Mm.
And so, if you can start to make the group that you run in, which is this collective of therapists, realize that it's not good for the group security, safety, the furtherance of the collective, if it's not good for them to not make these types of decisions that are ultimately good for their clients, well, then you start to naturally push in the direction. You're starting to say now the acceptable norm is to adopt these behaviors that maybe you haven't adopted in the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah, and for me, I see a message of people that come to us for therapy. So whether whether we're a aromatherapist, physiotherapist, or psychotherapist, people come to us with an assumption that we are a trusted other, that we can provide them with a safe space. And of course,
Right.
what I've picked up in terms of the common themes that happened were, many people didn't want to be an online therapist. So a couple of years ago, I delivered some training and said, the future's coming, technology's changing. And somebody said, I will always be a face-to-face therapist. And when lockdown happened and we all went into lockdown, I kind of thought, I wonder how that woman's doing in today's society, because suddenly
Yeah.
her hand was forced. Um, and what's happened is I'm just thinking about the journal article that I've done, that the lack of training that we were given pre-COVID was because my profession hadn't even assumed that there was no business contingency plan. There was no, forward thinking in terms of what would we do if. And of course, because people have made it what I call everyday assumptions, I use WhatsApp with my I don't know, my family, my friends, so I can use it with clients. I
Right.
talk to, I talk to my friends on Zoom, so I can use Zoom. And what's currently happening is I know that training organizations are saying we need to teach you how to effectively do, in inverted commas, therapy online. And of course, the return argument at the minute is, well, I've been doing it for a year. Why do I need the training?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
can see the same for security.
Well, there's, I think, a responsibility. Of course, there's responsibility on both parts. One is if you are intentionally serving a client base, then you should know what the Hippocratic oath is for that client base. It's not just the
Uh-huh.
health of that client, but it's all the other things that go along with that, which would be kind of things around identity theft, around data security, around the perception of privacy, and so on. So that has to be incorporated within the way that people perceive the Hippocratic Oath. But the other thing that comes into that is that when people will not take care of themselves, and even though that could be the therapist community at this point with the way that they provide some services, um, there's a natural market gap that emerges in two ways. One is there's a gap that emerges for products that will naturally offer the right amount of safety and security that therapists should adopt and
Mhm.
should be reasonably priced for therapists. But then the other one is a market gap that is spawned by both the community and kind of that ostracized or idolized type of mindset that I talked about before, but with the community itself, and then also within some of the people that they're serving, there will naturally be people that are looking for assurances of the fact that their data is preserved well, or the fact that they have the right level of privacy, and they'll naturally gravitate towards therapists that are showing that they provide that.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm thinking of the word integrity here. So
right.
when I'm teaching, one of the things I attempt to communicate is basically that Hippocratic oath, in terms of actually you have a duty of care to your client, and in the real world, you say to them, I will offer you a safe space, and yada yada yada, and the person comes in. Now this I've managed to get into the journal, and the reason I got it into the journal is because I think it's so imperative to make the distinction. In my psychotherapy office, I ask people to just be aware of the fact that if they bring their phone in, that there's issues with that. And I've got a
Yep.
contract, and I talk to them about, privacy. You can't record the session. I won't record the session. Make sure that your phone is actually turned off, because there's a good chance if you say the word seriously that Siri will think that you're talking to, all of this kind of conversation. But I know fairly securely within myself, there are no listening devices in the walls. Nobody is sat in the room with us. It is me and the client and the four walls.
Right.
And yet when I go online, I know that there are certain things I need to do to recreate that same level of confidentiality, safety, security, privacy, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And the bit that I find my profession struggles with the most is understanding that virtual spaces are not the same as physical spaces, because they don't, I would say it's like there isn't this understanding about what privacy actually means, how identity theft occurs, what phishing attacks are, why they would even need to consider not being connected to the internet when they're doing certain things with certain files.
Mhm.
Data in transit, data in storage. It's really quite
Yeah.
too much for a lot of them.
It really is, and I think you used the right word there. It's too much. And one of the things that I talk about in the book, and then I talk about with people that are trying to do security awareness within organizations, is sometimes you get to a point where you cannot reasonably expect a non-professional, non-security professional to think about or do certain things. Um, and at that point, you have to build safe structures around those people. You have to build secure tools that will naturally enable the behavior that you're wanting, in a way that is virtually frictionless to them, to where they don't try to go around it. Because right now, I can imagine there's probably some very good, secure virtual therapy rooms that are out there, that there is friction to adoption, either because of cost or usability. And
It's the
if either or both of those, yeah. So if cost is not the prohibitive thing, and it's only 10 to $50 a month or something like that, and it's easy to do, so that's not a barrier. So we could go to the fog model with this, right? Because if the
Yes, please.
ability piece is taken away, then then you start to look at, all right, what's the factor that's stopping this? Is it that just that they don't want to, that there's a motivation problem, or is there another ability problem that we have to cross over? So the finances aren't a piece, but maybe there's a piece of software that has to be installed, or that software is clunky and people don't like it. People just naturally use Zoom more, and so I've got to convert them to another platform now. So how do we deal with all of that in an effective way? And those start to be the things that you're trying to solve for at that point.
Okay, so I shall definitely throw it back at you in terms of research, and this is my experience
Yeah.
over the past few years. First of all, there is a motivation in terms of cost issue. So I often refer people to an email service that I use, mainly because it's forensically secure, it's easy to use, and it just requires an add-on. So
Yeah.
in terms of Outlook or Gmail or whatever, it's a little add-on. It's not a whole complicated system that you have to download, and the person here in the UK will take them through the process.
Right.
What we've actually found in conversations, so conversations I've had post trainings, conversations I've had with the organisation, people are saying, can I not just have it for free? So what we do find is that if it comes to email, even things like, I will advise people, get a really good, I don't know, antivirus software program. And then I get asked, what do you use, Kath? So I'll give them the name of what I use, and they go, that's expensive. And my response is usually, yeah, well, wait until there's an issue, because that will be much, much more expensive.
Right.
So I do see that there is this resistance to pay out. It's definitely a motivational issue, but also to use tech in a way that therapists need to. It needs to be an easy to use platform like Zoom. It needs to have a nice UX experience, and so I find that there's a few steps that still
you have to make the technology just not a barrier at all. And that's why Zoom has become the conferencing platform of choice for virtually everybody around the world.
Yeah.
There are other good conferencing platforms out there. I mean, Microsoft Teams gets used a lot. There's a few others, but there's always Cisco WebEx. There's also always little components that you either have to download, or it's not the expected experience, or it doesn't work right with the cameras or something else. And people just go, well, Zoom, is popular because it just works. And from a therapy perspective, you have to have something that just works, because you're dealing with people that are a lot of the times not at their best points of their life. They're stressed out. They don't need one more thing that they have to figure out. Otherwise, they'll just say, screw it, I'm going to do without it.
Yes.
So then
Yeah.
as a therapist, I think the other thing that you have to think about is, or get into people's heads, is that, yeah, it's an additional cost, but so is licensing. So is the other things. And maybe in the newer era that we're moving into, maybe having a physical office space that you're renting in town, maybe that's not a necessary thing. And so you take the several £100s that you're spending for that every month, and you refocus those funds into things that are going to make your business into the most effective business that you can create in whatever the new normal is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's something about difficulties with technology. So I do find quite often that I will get emails from therapists as though I'm back on third line support. I don't know, I've downloaded this file, Kath. What does it actually mean? How do I? And sometimes I'm like, I'm not working in IT anymore doing this. But I find I will look at something and go, okay, this is quite easy to use, and if you can get people to help you use it, then that takes away some of those barriers.
Right.
But I think the difficulty I have is explaining why, well, not the difficulty I have explaining, but I mean for the profession, is why those things are necessary. And that takes me back to that Hippocratic Oath part that you were talking about. Well, it's
Yeah.
necessary as a duty of care to somebody who is in distress.
Yep.
And,
Yeah.
more often than not, the thing that I communicate most is to do with emails. That more, when a potential client or a new client comes and says, hi Kath, I've just got your number from, what they tend to do is tell me all of the story in the first email. Now, I
Mhm.
can't protect, and I did have this with a big organization, actually, an advertising agency, where all of the therapists were listed. And I said, you take X amount of money from the therapist every single month, and you send out an email that's unencrypted. There's no protection on it in transit. And they actually said, well, you should tell the people not to do that. And
Mhm.
I said, I'm sorry, do I have ESP? And I send out a message to every potential client telling them, just send me an email that says contact or email me back. Because at the end of the day, they're using a service that should be, again, there's that air quotes of should be protecting the people that are coming to the platform looking for somebody to help them with their mental distress.
Right.
And there's faults at so many levels with this, Perry, to be perfectly honest, in
Yeah.
terms of the platforms that advertise you, the platforms that email you out, the secure platforms that are clunky. I even tried during lockdown to use Wire with a few clients. Yeah, it just didn't happen. It was far too
Mhm.
complicated for somebody whose nervous system is all over the place and they just want to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I think that's the biggest problem there with
mhm,
when you're dealing with a vulnerable population, people that are stressed out, people who are fearful, they're at their breaking point.
yeah,
To have somebody jump through another hoop is really, really difficult. And then, so that's why secure by design and ease of use are critical for vendors that are trying to serve this community to get right. And because the last thing you have to do, you want to do as a therapist is say, yes, come to me and it's going to be a safe, good experience, but here are the 15 steps that you need to take in order to make this happen.
yeah,
Because they're
yes.
just going to get, either get frustrated and stop or go to somebody else that's not trying to have the same duty of care.
Hmm. I have a message on some of the platforms that I advertise on, and one of them says you might want to clear your, I don't know, clear your cookies and your cache. I
Yeah.
know that pretty much, number one, people don't read it, but I have a duty of care to inform them. So
Right.
that's why the message is on these particular platforms, because what that does do is it says to somebody who might be in the right space to read it, I take your data and your privacy very, very seriously. And that, for me, that's the message I want to convey about my integrity and the way that I work. But I'm going to veer off slightly here. How
Sure.
do we educate around? And I'm thinking this is one of your expertise areas. How do we educate around phishing? Because I think that's the message and that's the bit that isn't understood. That yes, great, you might have taken all of those steps and you use a platform that's safe and
Right.
you only communicate with your client maybe on that platform, but you click on a link that says it might be your bank or Amazon, or that what that actually, what it is that we could be helping people understand in terms of, phishing and responsibility of jobs as remote workers.
Yeah. Well, if you work as part of an organization, then it should be the organization's duty to do frequent simulated phishing tests, because ultimately you're trying to train a habit there. Because all of us, we're all emotional creatures, and in the height of that emotion, we will make knee jerk. It's like, catching the pen that's about to roll off the end of your desk, and as you do that, you accidentally slap your coffee cup away, and you cause a big mess. Um, so um, we have to be conditioned to the fact that we will make those knee-jerk decisions when somebody pulls an emotional lever of authority or fear within an email or urgency or something else, and we're very likely to go ahead and click that link. So the only way to train yourself out of that is to be put in that situation over and over and over again. And so that's hard to do for people that are their own individual practitioners, unless you maybe set yourself up with a service like that, or tell friends and coworkers to, or people within your community to try to trick you every now and then. I want to be on my toes. Go ahead and trick me. So that's a little bit harder if you're your own floating island. But if you work as part of a collective, then the collective can sign up for a service like that and test all those people. And here's the thing with that, though, is I have seen people try to send out one test a year or one test every quarter, and I don't think that that's effective at all. I think if you only do it once a year or once a quarter, you only realize how pathetic you are. It's the same as if you only exercise once a year or once every 3 months, you'll only realize how out of shape you are. And that's the only value you get. But if you do it frequently, if you do it as often as possible, then you start to build up real, a nice healthy habit. You start to build real muscle tone. Here we're talking about the muscle reflexes of avoiding the fish, and you start to move in a more positive direction.
Well, I mean, that brings me into the neuroscience of neuroplastic changes. Actually, it is frequency, it is timing, and I'm thinking about another one of the concepts that you discuss in the book, which is that variable reward ratio.
Yeah.
So being able to, number one, feel like you've beat the meanies. That's how I always talk about it, is beat the meanies. That I think as part of, so I'm part of one membership body, and as I was saying to you before we started, there's so many different membership bodies that I think it's the membership body's duty of care to actually do that, whether it's being in a company, but actually sending those emails to test the therapists, to say, this could happen at any time, and what we're aware of is this could put you and your client. So it's never just about the client, it's always put you and your client at risk.
Well, and to do it in a way that doesn't, because this is another pitfall that I've seen people fall into, is if you don't tell people why you're doing that kind of testing, then they assume that you're out there to get them in some way. And you don't want that, or your IT staff is there just making fun of them. And that's the last thing that you want, especially in these hyper stress times. And so you do have to say, this is part of duty of care. This is part of doing the right thing. We're not out there trying to trick you or to laugh at you. We're trying to make you stronger so that you are there for your clients in the way that you need to be there. Yeah. And that's key. Actually, when the pandemic started and lockdown started, and we knew that that cyber criminals were going to be taking advantage of that like crazy. One of the things that I did is I got together with a voice actor that I knew could pull off the right tone, and just did a really quick video over the weekend with, frankly, it was just stock imagery and it's stock music, but we wanted to put out something really quick that had the right tone. And he did it. It was, the video just started off with a click sound, and just has text going across and then fades into some other nice imagery. But it just says, oops, you clicked. We get it. Things are really, really hard right now. You're stressed out. The world is crazy. You don't know what normal looks like, but cyber criminals are taking advantage of this. You're safe. The organization is safe. But here's what we need to be looking at.
Yeah, I did say that as we went into lockdown, the first kind of thought that went through my head is both cyber criminals and perpetrators of crimes against children must have been rubbing their hands together with glee.
Oh,
it
yeah.
Must have been this is like Christmas all at once. And of course, the profession that I'm with may not have even understood why that might have been an issue. And of course, I'm now going off on a slight tangent.
You would hope that therapists would, they understand. If you work with victims at all, you should understand the mindset and the drives of a predator. And I think that may be one of the key ways that you can start to get this across to your community. Is saying, if you're advocating for people who have been victimized, then you need to understand the mindset and the drives of a victimizer, whether that's digital or whether that's physical, so that you can best protect your the people that are trusting you with their care.
Yeah, funnily enough, that's one of the things that I do in my training. Now, it isn't as I would love to be able to do the fancy one that I think's talked about in the book, and I can't remember if it was you or another professional, about setting up a whole environment where people can go and, you know, play the criminal, go and set up a phishing attack and so on. Now, I have to do it in a slightly different way in terms of asking them to talk amongst themselves as a group and think about it.
Right.
But by thinking like a perpetrator, whether it's a cyber criminal or you know, somebody that's going to harm your client, you can start to understand what it is these people are actually aiming
Exactly.
to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the security world, we just call that threat modeling, right? Is you get out there and you model the threats and you put people in the shoes of the attacker. And I think that that's something that people actually, when you give them the space to do it, they enjoy it, because all of us like to be a little bit evil now and then.
Yeah.
And it gives people a safe, ethically positive way of kind of playing with that evil side of themselves.
Mm. Most certainly. And I think sometimes that's the only way. And I'm just thinking here actually about the training that I received is you would get training about this is what it's like to work with a client who's bullied. This is what it's like to work with an addict. This is what it's like to work with. And
Yeah.
we'd get these labels, and then we'd get the training about how to work with them. And one of the things I've noticed right the way across the board is that there are varying levels of understanding about what these issues are, but also I don't know whether, and this comes to something called mirror neurons and empathic pathways through the brain, that you have to be able to imagine what it's like for that person. This is going to your theory of mind perspective.
Right.
So, you know, this is around Piaget stuff in terms of children when they first begin to develop it. I like to actually get people to put themselves into the shoes of the victim, of the cyberbully, of
Yeah.
the child who's been sexually groomed. That gives you a better understanding than me pointing the finger and saying, you know, this is what it's like, because actually you have to get a sensation of what it's like.
Right.
And I think this is why I was so enamored with your book, and I'm hoping that, you know, people within your profession really get to grips with the theories that are in there. I know that you talk to a lot of deep psychological theories all the way through the book. For me, I was very, very pleased because I was like, oh yeah, I know what that is, so I know what you're talking about, and I could
Yeah,
listen
all
to
that's old hat for people that have lived in that space for a while. But the good thing is that most of the cybersecurity, well, good and bad thing, is that most of those within the cybersecurity profession are being exposed to those for the first time now, and they're starting to see that, oh wait, you know, a lot of this has been, you know, these problems that we're trying to deal with, they've been being dealt with by other professions for a long time. And we don't have to go invent a whole new discipline to start to think about how to combat these
yeah.
things.
Yeah, and it's for me, I was actually quite excited to be going through the book, going, thank God somebody's talking about this stuff. This is,
Yeah.
as I've said so many times, especially if I do speak at cybersecurity events, I notice when I'm talking, it's like I'm talking a language I know, I understand, it's embodied, and then I see the faces in the audience, and they're all like, oh, really? Oh, I didn't know people did. It becomes quite an exciting place in
It
terms
does.
of
Yeah.
actually you can work with people in a different way to that rote remote kind of regurgitate model. So I mean, for me, the book was just, it was absolutely outstanding. As I said to you, it was just so nice to read a
Thank you.
book that had so many theories in it, and of course people that I do recognize and respect in terms of models. I don't necessarily subscribe to the behavioral model in terms of, I do like BJ Fogg, but at the same time he also leans in terms of, he forgets that humans are actually humans and treats them very much like pigeons, a bit like BF Skinner did. So there's kind of lots and lots of things in there that I think would be really important for people to be able to understand. I think it would do brilliantly in my sector in terms of, you know, people being able to understand why we need to do the things, even though it does talk to the bigger corporations.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
there's
I think on the topic of models, I think that it's useful to use virtually anybody's model in the behavior space. So when you think about fog, you think about motivation, somebody's ability to do something, and then what's the prompt to do that behavior. So it is a little bit formulaic in the way, and I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about how to apply that model out there. But there's another good way of thinking about it that I think is super accessible for people that's outside of BJ Fogg's line of using it. There's a guy named Matt Wallert who was a behavior designer for Microsoft and for a couple companies within the healthcare space. And he wrote a book called, what is it? I've got it on my shelf. Start at the End. And what he talks about is that within a single sheet of paper, you could basically build a behavior model, because all you have to think about is promoting pressures or inhibiting pressures. So how much friction are you going to create, or how much friction can you reduce? And sometimes you can get the behavior you want, not by just stacking up a whole bunch of promoting pressures, things that would affect motivation or ability, make them stronger, or give them more, gusto in why they want to do it. Maybe sometimes it's just removing and inhibiting pressure. Make it easier.
And that is exactly how the pharmacology world works. It's how the brain works. It's how, do you know what I mean? It's like you could do that in neuroscience. You could do it in attachment behavior, because essentially we are just a collection of cells that like to do one of two things: either move towards, which is that kind of activation, and or we move away. So you've got inhibition versus excitatory. It depends what paradigm you're in as to what word you use. And I was going to come back to the prompts, because I did say I'd do that. I think one of the things I think that would be really helpful, and I haven't seen this yet, which is why I was kind of wanting to come back to this. In terms of the seatbelt prompt, we have as you talked about, feeling safe, wanting to put it on, it becomes an automatic behavior. But boy, does your car let you know if you haven't plugged your seatbelt in. That prompt is, and it's almost shaming, that bing, bing, bing.
It's definitely annoying if it's not shaming, right? So that's what they're going for is how can I make this such a thing that cannot be ignored, that you will deal with it. And people can still go around that, right? They can buckle the seatbelt behind them, and still get out of it. But they're having to take an action still to do that. They cannot just ignore it. And I think that that's the key thing that the automotive industry added. Whether people love it or hate it, it's effective in getting somebody to do a behavior, not just ignore something.
Yeah. So before we come to the end, is there, now I'm not a great believer in tech solves all human behavior problems, but is there a system, like, I don't know, is there a system that people could use, or we could even get integrated into? So I'm thinking here a bigger picture, and maybe this might be something for you to put out to your sector in terms of just thinking here, to create those prompts for people, like I'm trying to say, those singular practitioners. Is there a way we could do that? Because I know we get Outlook reminders, calendar reminders, appointment reminder, whatever it is. Why haven't we got something that really helps the at-home practitioner? Why haven't we got something that the seatbelt bing, bing, bing noise?
That's a great question. And I think there's a few things that come into that, because I know when I was at Gartner, and people would say, hey, I've got a great antivirus product. It works well. It solved problems at all of these companies. I'm going to sell it to consumers. And we'd always say, it's a bad idea. People won't pay for security for themselves, because we've seen that over and over and over again. People expect that to be bundled in with an already given service. And so the only way to get prompts to work, actually, there's a few things that we have to wrestle with when it comes to prompts. But number one is get the prompt bundled into a service that's already there in some way, or something to where they don't even have to think about it. So the prompt isn't needed. But if there's an action that somebody has to take, go ahead and prompt. But then you have to solve for prompt fatigue. which is the fact that I get prompted all day long from app notifications, text messages, Outlook reminders, and everything else. And I swat those things away without reading them all the time now. So how do
Yes.
I change it up so that it's not psychologically invisible
Yeah.
anymore? And that's the next piece to solve for. So number one is bundle the functionality in so that you don't even have to prompt. If you need somebody to jump over a behavioral hurdle, yeah, go ahead and prompt, but do it in a way that's not invisible yet, because it will be invisible later. And then so find a way to shake it up enough to where you're prompting multiple ways through multiple channels and multiple timings, using different sound cues or something else, such that it's always finding a way to break the pattern.
Mm-hmm. And
Pattern interrupts are going to be the way to deal with this.
yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the issues that we've got at the minute, isn't it, in terms of these notifications. And now we've been told, and I disagree with this particular program in a lot of what it says, but we've been told that those things were created to manipulate us. So now people will actually have a resentment against the notifications. So I think whilst the Social Dilemma documentary tried to educate, what it actually did was it layered in another form of behavior without recognizing. And this is one of the things about the whole scenario of the big tech organizations setting up something and saying, actually, we manipulated you all along with these notifications.
Right.
Is now there's a lot of people going, right, so notifications are there to manipulate me, not to pay attention to because they're important. So I think we're in a very delicate place at the moment about how we even do this.
Yeah, well, so there's a couple of different forms of notifications that we see. Some which we know are intentionally manipulative, right? Because you see some apps that are just grabbing your attention because they're trying to grab your attention to get you to use the app in some way or interact with it. Go ahead and get me my ad revenue or eyes on screen time. But if we can get notifications that are context aware, context dependent, it knows the person is about to do this thing, or is about to engage in this type of behavior, and I'm going to prompt them or issue a notification in a way that's nurturing, then you're starting to accomplish something. So behavior aware, context aware, device aware, that's the way that it has to start going. So that you start to then rely on that notification slightly differently than you do on the other types of notifications that you're getting.
I do see this absolutely mirrors where I'm coming from in terms of the education around technology and so on and so forth. I think we need to start bottom up with the next generation in terms of they will be so tech savvy, so so aware. Actually, they will care by the time they get to high school and they're using some of the devices. And at the moment, I think the other way that you're talking about this kind of top down is that's the one that takes a lot longer to implement.
Yeah.
And
it definitely takes a lot longer to implement, and you're pushing against the psychological resistance of a lot of it.
Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to think about who it was that actually said this about try not to fight against human behavior because it's a wall you cannot push over. So that something like that I've read.
Yeah. Well, I have that built into a little bit in the way that I talk about the 3 realities of security awareness. So I've got, number 1 is just because I'm aware doesn't mean that I care. Number 2 is if we try to work against human nature, we will fail. And then number 3 is what our employees do is way more important than what they know. So you encapsulated that number 2 piece of that in there.
Yes, and the thing is when I was reading your book, it was full of those nuggets, and I was like, yes, it was just so nice to see it written in a sector that I hadn't seen it before. Because I think when we first started talking, this is what I noticed is the 2 domains that I've come from, never the twain have met before. Right. And your book kind of stopped me feeling so alone, actually, because I was like, somebody else is talking the same kind of stuff I'm talking and lives in that sector. So I'm not all by myself.
That's great. Yeah, I used to tell people back when I was at Gartner and I would do policy reviews or talk to CISOs about the frustrations that they were having. I'd say all the time, if there is a gap between your policy expectation and your behavioral reality, it's probably because your policy doesn't expect humans to be part of the equation. And so it's written in a way or delivered in a way or has expectations in some way that just don't align with natural human behavior.
Yeah. And I suspect that is the well, we know it is. It's the most important factor, isn't it? Is human beings. You
Yeah.
know, what was the phrase that the IT departments used to use is the user was the problem.
Oh, yeah.
Sat at the keyboard, and obviously it was again. I find that that's the IT department and my industry in terms of they don't understand each other's language. And I worked at an organisation where there used to be paper folders, and it'd be, you know, the intake form, this form, that form, the other form. And the system was updated by some IT people, and the therapists could not navigate it. And it was a really interesting moment to sit there and go, I can see what the IT department have done, and they've done it brilliantly and logically. They just haven't understood the users, the way that people think in this profession. And of course, they wanted to put things with links and backlinks in. And of course, people didn't understand that kind of technology and why will you need to click on this one here, and why didn't it save on this, and why did I have to copy it twice here? And you know, it just created such a difficulty for the first 6 months while people got used to the platform. And even then, people use the platform in a very bare minimum way. It was, you know, well, I'll use this form, but I don't know how to get to those other ones. So I did spend 6 months pretty much over people's shoulders going, okay, now you've clicked on that, now click on that, and then when you've clicked on that, that will put it into that folder for you. And I used to sit with a piece of paper showing them how it actually worked.
Yeah, that's a process that's fundamentally broken at that point.
Yeah. Well, I did say we would go for about this long, Perry. So I just want to thank you so much for your time and your insight, and for the book. And of course, is there anything that you would want to add on in terms of security awareness, anything?
I'll just say something that I've been saying in a couple presentations lately, and I think fits in well with your domain, is that if as a society we're going to take on anything within our next generation, we have to take on the awareness of the fact that we are subject to cognitive bias, and we have to start building in processes, technologies, conversations, and so much more that helps us to solve for that. Because all we have to do is look at the world over the past few years, and we see where cognitive bias that's unfettered or that is encouraged gets us. And that's what social engineers take advantage of in the cybersecurity space. That's what everybody uses to our own detriment. I'd say it's not just the cybersecurity; it's nation states, it's politicians, it's everybody else. Anybody will try to appeal to a cognitive bias in order to get their own way across, and it's frankly tearing us apart. And so that's where I think society needs to place some focus right now. And from a technology perspective, from a security perspective, and just from a conversation perspective, we need to spend some intentional time there.
Amen to that. That was a wonderful, wonderful ending. So
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time, Perry.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.